A man arrested yesterday has now been charged in connection with a double homicide that occurred in October. At approximately 10 a.m. on Monday, October 19th, 2015, police were called to check on the welfare of an individual in the 200 block of Coventry Close Northeast. Once inside, police discovered 2 women deceased in the residence. Autopsies completed by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner formally identified the victims as Selamawit ALEM, 54, and Julie TRAN, 25, both of Calgary. The victims died as a result of stab wounds. Emanuel KAHSAI, 30, from Calgary, was charged late last night with first-degree murder in connection with the death of Selamawit ALEM and second-degree murder in connection with the death of Julie TRAN. Emanuel KAHSAI is a biological son of Selamawit ALEM. His next court appearance is scheduled for November 27th. I'll now answer your questions.
Just so you're saying it out loud, so it's believed that he planned the murder of his mother.
I can talk in general terms in regards to the charges. First-degree murder involves the intent to murder someone with planning and deliberation. Second-degree murder, the intent is still there, but the planning and deliberation are absent.
What's the relation with Julie TRAN then? What's her connection?
Julie TRAN was in the home. Selamawit was employed as a caregiver, and she was acting as a caregiver for Julie and one other individual. The other individual was not at home at the time of the incident, but he was interviewed and he is quite distraught over what has happened.
In other words, completely, he's zero responsibility for it.
He is not involved whatsoever.
Initially, you'd said there was a person of interest, but he was being held on unrelated matters. So
Yes, so this is the same individual that we had as a person of interest from the start of the investigation. He was arrested in Edmonton on October 20th on outstanding warrants. At the time, we also recovered the victim's vehicle in Edmonton. He was transported down to Calgary and interviewed, but was uncooperative with the investigation. We conducted a forensic examination of all evidence gathered during the course of our investigation. Based on our complete and thorough investigation and the results from the forensic examination of evidence, in consultation with the Crown Prosecutor's Office, we were able to lay the charges of first and second degree murder.
So had he been released and then rearrested?
No, he was in custody on those outstanding warrants and remained so until arrested yesterday.
Those outstanding warrants, are those for an unrelated matter, or were they related?
They are for a related matter.
For a related matter. And I've heard that there'd been a history of threats there, like the mother had been afraid of her son in the past.
What I can tell you is that we had been to the residence on previous occasions, but because this is currently before the courts now, I can't get into specifics in regards to those investigations.
Maybe this is more a question for your colleague, who I understand is going to speak to some of the underlying issues maybe, but is there something, what can people do, I guess, in these situations, whether it's you're observing something with your neighbors or...
And what I'll do is I'll bow to Staff Sergeant Rob Davidson.
Any other questions on homicide?
Are you able to speak at all to the series of events? Because I know earlier you'd said, I think, the women had believed to be killed 36.
Yeah, so what we can tell you is that we received a phone call on Monday, October 19th, to check on the welfare of Selamawit. Family and friends had attempted to contact them over the weekend and were unable to do so. So this woman was concerned about Selamawit's welfare. We do believe that they were last known to be alive on the morning of Saturday, October 17th.
So what's the date of death as best we understand it?
Sometime between the morning of the 17th and when they were discovered Monday morning.
And then you mentioned too that the victim's vehicle was found in Edmonton, so is it believed that the act allegedly took place, and then he took the vehicle and immediately fled?
Well, we believe that he took the vehicle up to Edmonton. As for the timing, we're not quite sure yet.
Two pieces of just housekeeping, not something I plan to use for broadcast here, but you pronounced his name KAHSAI. Did you get the S, the H, and the S mixed?
KAHSAI.
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 KAHSAI is
Emanuel KAHSAI. And I'm just going from the phonetics.
phonetics. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sure. Just trying to fit that. And secondly, what do we know why Julie TRAN needed a caregiver?
I can't get into her history or background.
Any weapon recovered?
We did not recover a weapon.
Okay. We'll
Okay.
hand over to Staff Sergeant Rob Davidson, we'll just talk to the domestic side of things.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
Ready? Yeah, you bet.
Just get your name and
Yeah,
spell
you bet.
whenever you're ready.
Yeah, and it's Rob Davidson, R-O-B, and D-A-V-I-D-S-O-N, and I am the Staff Sergeant in charge of the Domestic Conflict Unit.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
You good?
No, please, yeah.
Okay. You know, the Calgary Police Service takes domestic violence exceptionally serious, and November is Family Violence Prevention Month, and it makes me very sad, you know, particularly to have these type of events and to have to come and talk about these. In Calgary, we have 38 officers that are assigned to the Domestic Conflict Unit. And we work with a definition called domestic conflict, not domestic violence. And what we do is we use that term domestic conflict, and we have a very broad definition for that. And the reason we do that is that when we have a call for service that's generated out in the community, and that meets that definition of a broad family member within domestic conflict, our officers put in an information report or do the investigation. Part of that reason for that is that we have a team of risk assessors who are committed to reviewing each call for service that's domestic in nature. They look at that particular event and they look at the entire history that occurs in there. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to look for risk factors or things that would present for being at risk for domestic violence. And so we have this team committed to try and figure out, is there anything further that we need to do as the police or one of our community partners can do to either help prevent domestic violence or help reduce domestic violence. So on average, we have just under 18,000 calls for service a year that are domestic in nature. A very small portion of those result in criminal charges. What we do is we try and assess and figure out, is there anything further that the Calgary Police Service needs to do to help this family? And if the answer to that is yes, then we assign it to the Domestic Conflicts Unit. Domestic violence is extremely complex, and it makes it challenging because the violence is the end result. It's usually not the underlying precursor, the stressors that results in the violence. In particular to this event, based on the information that we had, there was absolutely no indication for us to show the severity or to show the risk that would present itself in the case of a homicide. And we end up, it's a very sad reality of domestic violence due to the complexity is that at times the information that we have may not necessarily match everything that's going on within a family unit. And it makes me very sad to have these events, and certainly our condolences go out to the family and all those involved. Domestic violence is very serious, and if someone is a victim of domestic violence, if you have a friend who's a victim of domestic violence, if you have a coworker who's a victim of domestic violence, there are many services available, not just police. There are shelters, there's counselings, there's victim services. We need people to reach out and let us know that these events are occurring, and we can get the appropriate resources in place.
So when you say appropriate resources, then that means, I guess some people, I imagine, don't reach out for help to police because they're afraid that triggers a criminal process. Is that?
Absolutely, I totally agree.
Or
So there's a lot of
punitive
anxiety.
process.
There's a lot of reasons why people won't reach out. It can be fear of the systems. It could be fear of the justice. These are complex issues, and it isn't as simple as sometimes reaching out to the police. Often, though, in some of these cases, these are pre-indicators to domestic violence. So no criminal event has taken place. It's just at risk. And even if it's not reaching out specifically to the Calgary Police Service asking for help, there are numbers, there's shelters, there's counseling, there are victim services. There's a lot of places that they can go to and try and find the right resources to make that better.
My math isn't that good, but I'm just gonna say if it's 18,000 a year and 365 days, that's a lot of calls every day. It's a big piece of what police are called out to do, and yet we notice, because we've had a number of high-profile domestic homicides in the past, over the last year or two here. There's been a couple. The details of them are pretty awful. I think in those cases, sometimes maybe we notice that you hear that there were signs leading up to these things. Are some of these cases maybe just in retrospect get a little bit lost in the shuffle? Are you just a little bit buried by the problem sometimes? Like how do these kind of get escalate or get out of hand?
I think you're asking a lot of stuff in there, and so I'll try and answer best as I can. So 18,000 is a lot. One thing to keep in mind is that we're working with the term domestic conflict, not domestic violence. So when you go into different areas, when they work with intimate partner violence or spousal violence or domestic violence, they're specifically talking about criminal charges. We're using the term domestic conflict. We're just simply saying that there is something in that family that resulted in the police to be involved, so a really big number. It is a big number, but we've also made a commitment to increasing the number of risk assessors that are looking at these files. We have 4 full-time civilian risk assessors who specialize in domestic violence risk assessment. And their job is to review each and every single call for service that's domestic in nature, and to look to see whether or not there are indicators for violence or the potential for violence. And if the answer to that is yes, then they're either referred to one of the teams within the domestic conflict unit, like our domestic conflict response team, which is a uniform officer and a home front caseworker going out into that community and working with them. It might be within the domestic violence team, which is our specialized investigative team where violence has already occurred, where we work with our other partners. It could be one of the habitual offender management and enforcement teams where we look at chronic high risk, something that goes within there. Each and every single incident is assessed, and an assessment is written on that. So the volume is high, but I'm very confident that the quality of the work that's being done is good. When we have a serious event, and not just homicide, but a serious domestic assault, we review those in detail, and we try and figure out, was there any information that presented it itself beforehand that either systematically we've missed, maybe it's been within a community partner, something. Have we done what we could to do? We did what we could. What's unfortunate, and especially what we've seen, particularly this year, where we see no history or no indicators or no information shared with us that there's going to be or there's the potential for violence, it's very disheartening. And these are very complex issues. What I'm satisfied, particularly in this case, as I do to all of them as I review them, and I'm satisfied based on the information that was given to police and what we had available, there was no indication of risk. The challenge is, are we being given all the information in general when we look across the city? And that, again, it goes back to, if you are a victim, if you are a coworker, if you're a friend, these domestic violence occurs everywhere in the city. It is not isolated to one area. It is not isolated to a certain demographic. Please reach out to us or one of our community partners, and we will do what we can to help.
It sounds to me like in reducing that load, like there's a lot of things that are being put onto police that aren't really police issues necessarily. I mean, you might be the point of contact for them, but they're not things that policing is really meant to address.
It is a challenge in the sense that when we look at the stressors that occur typically leading up to domestic conflict and domestic violence, whatever those stressors are, police are generally not the right resource or the subject matter experts to do that. But nonetheless, we became aware of that call for service. We attended and we spoke to people, and we're obligated, and we need to look into that. And we need to make sure that it may not be us, but it'll be one of our community partners. That's why we have programs like the Domestic Conflict Response Team, so we can go out with a case manager who has that expertise to, get into the house, speak to the family, and figure out what is it does that particular family need, and how do we get the right resources. We're the point of contact, but like you said, we don't have the expertise or the ability to actually address a lot of these underlying causes, and that's why we work with our community partners.
In this case, you said you're satisfied that the information given to police demonstrated there was no indication of risk, but we know, we've gathered 2 emergency protection orders in which she did indicate she had called police. So are you saying that there wasn't any information in there that
I've reviewed the affidavits and the transcripts in regards to the emergency protection order, and there is a difference between the information that the police had and that information that was shared in those. Based on the information that we had, there was no indication for violence. Does that answer your question?
So why would there be a difference in the information? Like, what
Well,
was different?
Domestic violence is complex, and especially when we deal with someone who is a victim or believes they are or could be a victim of domestic violence. And there are times we see this quite regularly. If we look at emergency protection orders as an example, the majority of emergency protection orders are actually obtained by the claimant who goes to court. For reasons, whatever reasons, information that is not available or not provided to police are provided to the court. And so they are reaching out and seeking assistance. They're just choosing perhaps not to engage the police in all aspects of that.
Why would that information trickle down to you guys, so that shared information?
Sorry, say that again?
Information that, say they go to the courts, why wouldn't you have access to that?
When we become aware of it, absolutely we can have access to it. And in fact, one of the new processes that was just recently put in place is we call them claimant-driven emergency protection orders, and they will go to court on their own and apply for an EPO, and that is under the Family Protection Against, or the PAVA Act. So they're going to make the application into the courts. The police are involved in the service of that application. And one of the new things that we are doing is we're risk assessing. Even though the claimant has not called police, what we're doing is we're risk assessing their civil affidavit. It makes it challenging for this because they've chosen in many cases not to engage the police, but now we're aware of it. And so we're trying to risk assess those and reach out and offer some kind of assistance if it's needed.
But police had been to this house on previous occasions, so wouldn't there have been information on those?
Yes, there was, and the information that was shared with us at the time, again, did not indicate that there was any information to suggest the severity of an event like this. It's very tragic.
Okay. Questions?
I guess at what point would it be escalated to a high-risk situation?
So one of the things, these are good questions. So one of the things when we do the investigation is we ask the family violence investigative questions, the fever questions, when we're involved. And there's a number of questions that are in there. And what we're looking for through those questions is there a risk factor? Is it present? And to what context that would be? And those questions are asked by the investigating officer to one of the parties or both parties. And based on that, the responses to those, what the subjects are telling police, then we'll do the risk assessment in part based on that. What we have seen over time, particularly when we go back and do reviews, is some information, for whatever reason, isn't shared with the police.
And are you able to say whether this family was provided with resources?
So there were resources engaged. In particular, at one point Homefront was engaged as well. We did the assessment. It was not assigned to the domestic conflict unit, but in all cases where charges are laid in a domestic matter, all of those matters are referred to our community partner Homefront so that they can provide services to the victim.